You're listening to Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation podcast that aims to discuss issues and efforts related to the Muley Fanatic Foundation mission, the conservation of mule deer, furthering the sport of hunting, and sound wildlife management.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley fanatic.
It's time for Wild Things and Wild Places. And here's your guide, Joshua Corsi.
Welcome to Wild Things and Wild Places. Joining me today, I've got a guest. So many of these episodes that we've done since Wild Things and Wild Places made its debut last July 4th, 2023. We've had scientists, we've had decision makers, we've had policymakers, we've had chapter volunteer efforts associated directly with Muley Fanatic Foundation. And then there's been those campfire chats where we really tried to highlight just the love of hunting and our heritage that we value so much. And so this episode it's none of the above, and it's by design. I've got a gentleman who I have a great regard and respect for that is a true outdoorsman in every sense of the word. I'm excited to be able to introduce Alan Sinner from Riverton, Wyoming. Alan, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here this morning.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And again, I think that what makes this so unique is that you're not representing a product, you're not representing an initiative or an effort specific to mule deer. You're just an avid outdoorsman. You've made your living in the outdoors. You're a well-renowned photographer. You've got a great relationship with the reservation and the tribal leadership. And your story is worth telling to me. But I want to give you just a few minutes, and you just give a background of who you are. But I want to get to the pack trip.
Oh, the pack trip. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about.
I do want to get to that.
Okay, yeah. That's fine, yeah. I'm a lifelong resident of central Wyoming, born and raised. My father was born and raised in this area. My grandfather came from Nebraska when he was a little kid. I had my grandfather's grandfather was a soldier. He was here in the late 1800s. He actually was one of the soldiers that helped clean up after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. I go back out some pretty deep roots that way on my mom's side. But my family's been here since Riverton started and grew up here on the reservation, and it's one of the best places in the world to live. We have everything here. We have high desert, we have 12,000-foot peaks, and we have farmland and river bottoms all within minutes of where I live. And it's one of the most unique places, I think, in the West to grow up.
Boy, that gives a whole new meaning to Paradise Valley, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And that's where I live, is Paradise Valley, Wyoming. I live on Paradise Valley Road, so yeah. I don't know how that all worked out, but it did. And it's a great place to live. And I spend a lot of time on the reservation. As you said, I have a working relationship with the tribes. And the Wind River Indian Reservation is one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's really got some wild country out there.
Yeah, untouched, really.
Untouched. Very untouched. You can ride all day on horses and never cross a road. It's just the most amazing place.
Yeah.
So,
what is the total landscape?
I used to know we could Google it and find out, but
it's huge.
It's huge. It's huge. Yep.
All right. Professionally, you cut your teeth in the photography business years ago. Renowned photographer, very busy.
Well-renowned, but I've had a portrait and wedding studio in Riverton, Wyoming for 42 years, and had some satellite studios over in Big Piney and Worland and Rawlins and those kind of places. And I've been very blessed. I had good people that have worked for me for a long time. I have a wonderful young lady in my life, and her name is Dawn Lenhart, and she's worked for me for over 30 years, and she has kept me going. And I've had a couple other along the way that have been really good, and it's allowed me to do a lot of things that I normally couldn't do. So,
yeah, like many industries, that industry has changed significantly.
Immensely, yeah, the digital world. I had to relearn my career about 20 years ago, and digital's got some advantages, but some places I miss the old film days too.
Yeah.
But it's what it is, and I'm still doing a lot of schoolwork and portraits and those kind of things, but I've taken up a new hobby, and that's photography. I've been doing wildlife photography about the last 8 or 10 years, and I spend a lot of time out in the hills doing wildlife photography, and I really love it. It's changed my whole perspective on animals and how I feel about them, and it's I can hunt 365 days a year with a camera.
Yeah, and you found your niche within that. Wildlife photography is such a big arena in itself, but you've really been attracted to the predators and the carnivores.
I do. I don't know why. I used to trap a lot, and I used to catch a lot of fox and a lot of coyotes and some cats, and I learned a lot from doing that, and I don't trap like I used to. Some of it I just maybe lack of effort, but just maybe the killing of an animal, I don't know what it is, but I probably enjoy seeing them more alive now in my point in my life. You reach that point.
Right.
You see some older guys that say, I don't want to kill anything anymore. And when I was a kid, I used to think, how could you think that way? And now, guess
just
what?
part of the journey, huh?
Just part of the journey. Yeah. And now I love to sit and watch coyote dens, or swift foxes are my favorite thing to look around. I go out and find swift fox dens and like to photograph them, and I report them to Joe Holbrook, who's with the University of Wyoming, and they're doing a swift fox study. And I've never met the guy, but I've talked to him on the phone and texted, and he's got some technicians, I think, that put trail cameras on some of the dens I find. But that's what I like to do, is find fox dens. That's a hobby right now, and I love to go up on Togedy and photograph grizzly bears, and not just the roadside bears. I like to go around places where there's no people and try to find them and have some success. It's fun. I usually find one, but getting the right photograph is a problem sometimes. So
I would imagine your trapping background, which takes a tremendous amount of time and dedication to learn that skill and to hone that skill set, probably bodes well in what you now do with photography, I would think. I
was told by some old-time trappers that if you become a good trapper, you'll probably be a way better hunter or just an outdoorsman, and trapping is that way. I don't remember what the saying is, but it's something along the line that the hunter sees the trees and the trapper sees the trails and the holes in the trees. It gives me a whole different perspective of taking a 4-inch little leg hold trap and putting it out on 10,000 acres and getting a coyote to step in it. And you learn how animals move, and I learned so much by being out every day and doing my trap line and seeing how animals come in and catching things and how they move. And it was quite an experience, and I was somewhat successful. I had some pretty large catches in my time, and it was an experience that I'm glad I did it, and it's helped me with other things on just understanding wildlife as a general
just thing. Overall. Huh?
Overall. I put about 80,000 miles a year, or 80,000 every 2 years on my pickup just from Riverton, Wyoming. I wear a pickup out about every 2 years. And trapping will humble you, and I always blame Tom Krause. He's one that's wrote a lot of books, and he's the godfather of trapping, and he lives here, and he taught me a lot about trapping, and I always say he's responsible for me living in a little tiny house and not having any money, because trapping, if you have any money, you will get rid of it when you trap, but you'll have more fun than anybody else. So
what would you tell your younger self now in what you've learned, your best teacher being your own mistakes? What have you learned through your own efforts that it would have made things a lot easier if you could have told yourself years ago?
If I could have told myself, if I could do it all over again, I loved my career, and I would probably do it all over again. But I would probably go back. I would go to college and get a wildlife degree, or you know what I mean, and learn something about the scientific part of animals, so I understand that much. I've had to teach myself. I've got a bookshelf here, as you saw, and I got boxes of books, and I just read about animals all the time, and I would just say, go do it. And you got your whole life to make money, get a house, get wife, kids. Take your early life and go do something for those while you got the energy. That's one thing I've noticed. I'm 65 now, and I was just out with Rowdy Anderson and Cody Martin on their Bobcat line, walking around with them just to go along, and I don't have the energy I used to have. Yeah. The hills are steeper, and I'm like, holy cow, I'm glad I did it when I did it. You know?
Speaking of that, before you began your career, you took some time off. You decided you had this revelation that I need to go and I need to wander.
It wasn't really planned. When I was a young kid, I'm going to try to get this in chronological order, but when I was between my sophomore and junior year in high school, we had some horses, but I was just always reading the Jack O'Connor books about the hunting and packing in, and the guys that would go long ways in Alaska, and I was just intrigued by pack trips and packing in with horses. And the college had a packer guide class, and I told my dad I might want to take that, but the problem was they wouldn't let me go till I was 18. Fortunately, my mom worked in the school district, and she had some in, and they let me take it. Anyway, I went up to the CM ranch up in DuBois and took a packer guide class for the summer, and they taught us packing horses and the whole thing about the dude business, and that kind of set the tone for it. And then the following year, my dad was very busy. He was a successful oil field worker and had a trucking business, but he couldn't take me elk hunting one time, and I actually went elk hunting by myself when I was a senior in high school, and took my horses up to DuBois, and I was up at the double cabin, and I went up and shot this bull elk, and I was coming down the trail, and Bob Novotny was an outfitter up there, and he saw me riding down the trail, and he goes, oh, you killed an elk, or what'd you do? And I said, yeah, I killed an elk. And he looked around, he goes, where, you up here? I was just a dumb kid. He realized that, and he said, where's your dad? Because he had seen us down at the trailhead. I said, oh, my dad ain't here. He says, I'm up here by myself. And he was intrigued. And I was down there at my pickup and had a little teepee tent set up there. and he came down. Why don't you come on up and eat with me? And I thought, an outfitter is going to ask me to eat with him. And Bob Novotny was dean of sheep hunters at that time, well known about that, and lived in Kinnear. And he was a state senator. He was actually president of the Senate at the time. And I went and had dinner with him, and he said, what are you doing after you get out of high school? And I said, I don't know. I want to work in a hunting camp. And he says, well, you have a job if you want one. There I was. I had that set. And then, of all things, I ran into Pete Peterson, who had the CM ranch up in DuBois, where I took the Packer Guide class, and he offered me a job as a wrangler. So I got to do that for the summer and got to wrangle dudes and go into hunting camp that fall. But while I was at the CM, I worked with a gentleman by the name of Davey Meekum, and him and his girlfriend and his brother, and I believe they were married at the time, his wife, they were still married, but they had talked about going on an all-summer pack trip, and that really intrigued me. They pretty much went on about a 90-day pack trip and went back in, and they talked about that, and I thought that was really cool, just that idea. And about that time, we met Tori and Meredith Taylor, which you may know Tori and Meredith. They were big in a lot of wildlife organizations, and they had been on their trip that summer. They were doing their trip that summer, but they had came out, and we met them at DuBois at one of the activities that was there, and they were taking a little break. And all summer long, I just thought about that all-summer pack trip thing. I thought that was fun, and I thought that'd be something I'd like to do. And
a very narrow window of opportunity in one's life to be able to just say, you know what, I'm gonna take a summer, and I'm just
especially
gonna go.
When all my buddies were down at Laramie going to school, and or they were going to work at that time the Gas Hills was going, and these guys could go out here and
make some money,
obscene amount of money in the Gas Hills, and there I am making $300 a month as a horse wrangler at the Dude Ranch. But you got to kiss a lot of girls too. I got to throw that out. It was a great place to work, and the shoemakers were there. And if you read, I think it's Men Against the Mountains, Les and Alice shoemakers were really pioneers in some of the wilderness situations in Wyoming, and I got the opportunity to work with them. So anyway, of course, I thought I was in love at the CM with a gal, and she was going to come back and go with me on this all-summer pack trip I was talking about, but never saw her again. But come springtime, I worked in the oil fields to make some money, thinking I was going to do this, and took some college classes at CWC, and it came summertime, and I decided I'm going to go do it. And of course, people always say they want to do something with you, but it never pans out. So I just made plans to go by myself. And so I did some work and decided where I wanted to go and how I was going to do it as a 19-year-old kid. And I had a couple pack horses and my riding horse, and I had my dad drop me off, and off I went. I had a little planning. When I say I went all summer, I did have to come out a couple times and resupply. My parents met me back at the double cabin after a couple weeks, and then I remember Mrs. Prine at the Ramshorn Dude Ranch up in Dunor. I had met her working for the Novotnys, and I went back and talked to her, and I left a bunch of supplies, food, mostly just food, at her place. And then I knew a kid that wrangled dudes at the Togety Mountain Lodge, and I left some stuff there, and I knew I could make hits and make my way up. And it was all in the Absaroka Ranges where I went. And Dad took me to Double Cabin, and that's where I worked for the Novotnys, and I knew that country. And I remember I took off, and I said, I'll see you in a couple weeks. And my dad wasn't real happy about it, but when you're a 19-year-old kid, you're not afraid of anything. And I had a bunch of backpacker food in my pack horses, and off I went, and I covered pretty much that country, and I came back out. Met my parents a couple weeks later, and then I took off and went up Cougar Pass and all that country on the South Fork of the Shoshone and Marston Pass, and did all of that for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then I came to Togety Lodge, got my other set of food, and then I went back. But I never made it to the Yellowstone Meadows. I don't know why I never made it there, but I didn't really move all the time. I wanted to learn the country. And so I would ride up and go up a drainage, and I might stay there 2 or 3 days and go for walks and just learn the country. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and it was something that I'm so glad I did when I did, because the way life gets you, it'd be so hard to do it. I could probably do it now that I'm semi-retired, but I don't know. I don't know if I have the energy to do it. And thank God we got better food then, because I ate a lot of Spam and a lot of Roman noodles and a lot of Bisquick for biscuits. And some of the best food I had, I'll never forget. I was on Bliss Creek Meadows, and there was this beautiful young lady, and I don't know if she was pretty or not, but all I know is I got a good hamburger out of her for lunch, and she made me a big breakfast when I was camped down there. And that was in the time when I didn't run into very many people. I can remember crossing a couple pack trip strings and a couple Knowles people, but there was times I would go 6, 7, 8 days and not meet anybody. And it was quite an experience. it was I don't know if it was life-changing, and I want to thank Tori and Meredith and Davey Meekum for they don't even know that they had any influence on it, but just the fact that I was up there by myself with my 3 horses, and the only thing I might have wished I had was a good dog to take with you. It was a different time then, too. We didn't have the grizzly bear population then, and you could leave, you could move, and the food situation, you didn't have to have bear-proof panniers, and moving around was a lot easier. And I have bear-proof panniers now, and it's not any big deal. It just takes a little more time, but it was fun. Sometimes I would ride all day and see country, and sometimes I would pack my horses, and I'd probably ride 30 minutes and went, oh, I'm in a whole different area here. We need to camp here and go do some things, and it was quite a thing.
And this was late 70s, Alan?
I think, let's see, I graduated high school in 76. I worked the fall 76, 77. It was the summer of 77. Yeah. I graduated high school 76. Yeah, I worked for the CM, the botanies in the fall, and then I worked in the oil fields, went to college, did my pack trip. And then the cool thing about the pack trip is I left after the 4th of July. Mine wasn't all summer. I left after the 4th of July. We didn't have much snow that winter, and I could have left a lot earlier, but I was pretty much gone all of July and August. And then I came out, and I was only out for a couple days, and got Bob. Bob had already started, but I was still working for him. And then I went into hunting camp for 2.5 months. So I was pretty much 5 months we had nothing. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have radar things to get you out and that kind of thing. But when you're a 19-year-old kid, getting hurt in the hills, you don't think about that stuff. You just go.
Biggest surprise of that trip?
Biggest surprise?
Yeah.
Away how big some of that country is, but how small some of that country is. We talk about, we got a wilderness, and when we're taking all this land and turn it into wilderness, but sometimes you can cover a lot of country in a couple days, and you're across that wilderness area, and you're back to pavement and styrofoam. And I think we need to really look and see what we're doing. We are encroaching on a lot of property in this world, and I probably better do a disclaimer, because what I say is not the attitude of the mule deer fanatics, but I'm sorry to say, but I think we breed like fruit flies, for one thing, and we got to build houses and pavement to get to those houses, and we have to produce a lot of food to feed these people, and I'm scared to death that's going to be gone, and I'm glad I went there when I did. And I used to be a real right-wing conservative, and we need to log and we need to mine, because I grew up in that whole scenario with my family, and oil field put me through college, but we need to save some stuff, and we better start saving it now.
Yeah, expansion is amazing, isn't it?
It is.
If you look back at the turn of the 20th century, estimate 1.8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
50 years later, 2.8 billion. And then 50 years after that, we're at 7.8 billion.
It's just like a couple of years ago, I hadn't been up the lower end of the South Fork out of Cody for a long time. Many years. I rode a horse down to the end of it, but when I drove up there a few times, I hadn't been there in 20 years. I live here. When I drove up there, I had heard there was some grizzly bears at the end of the road, so I went up there to look for them. And when did they do that? And I know that's what we do. And I got my 10 acres or 20 acres in my little 1,200 square foot house. And it's amazing what we do. And we build bigger houses. And my parents, what they started as a house, and now the starter homes today are a lot bigger. And we could talk about that all day. But it was the trip. I didn't have any situations of anything at all. I actually saw my first grizzly bear in 1970. It'd be the summer of 77. It was 500 yards away through a spotting scope on the head of Sheep Creek, and I thought that was the most amazing thing. It was a sow and a yearling cub, and I was on the right fork of Sheep Creek. I will never forget that day, and it was something cool. And I'm not that I pro grizzly bear or pro wolf or anything like that, but I believe you had a gentleman that spoke at your mule deer fanatic thing one time, and I think the first words out of his mouth, aren't we glad we live in an area where there's grizzly bears?
Yeah, Jim Shockey.
Yeah, okay, or it was somebody along the line, and I guess the room got quiet or somebody, but anyway.
I think the point he made, though, was you still live in a place where grizzly bears
can exist.
And that does provide a different set of optics when you think about that. That you live in a landscape and in an environment that can be home to grizzly bears.
Right. And we got the wolves, and it all works. I've learned that from being a trapper, and I've caught wolves. I've actually went to Alaska and trapped wolves, and I've trapped in Saskatchewan and Montana and Wyoming and Nebraska, and I wanted to be good at it, so I went to a lot of places and went out with different people. And it's amazing how a lot of these guys that are out there trapping wolves and stuff, how they feel about how it all works. And
sure,
it all works. It all works. We got to have it all. We got to have it all.
There is a cycle there,
They do. I have a rancher friend that's out there on the Sweetwater, and I was helping him preg test cows one day, and some kids came up, and I love this little story, and they wanted to shoot some prairie dogs. And he goes, "No, I don't want anybody to shoot my prairie dogs." And the kid had to say it. He goes, "Charlie," says, "I love these. I call this Old West movies. They've seen too many movies. Them prairie dog holes, your horse or your cows could break a leg." And he sparred it off. He said, "If my horse or cows are dumb enough to fall in a prairie dog hole and break their leg, they deserve to die." I love this whole guy. And he doesn't kill rattlesnakes, and he's quite a guy. His first name's Charlie. I won't say his last name. He might get mad, but he's just what, and he's probably got a high school education, and he's been around cows, but he's rode enough, and he's out there a lot, and he's just one of the kindest, gentlest men, but he's really likes wildlife too. He knows it all needs to work with his cows and his prairie dogs and his pet rattlesnake and the coyote. It all works.
Right.
So, and I feel that way after trapping and being around things and photographing animals. And one thing about wildlife photography is when you're sitting on a den for 8 hours sometimes watching fox puppies play and foxes play, and you just, okay, there's a reason why it's all here. And same way with wolves. I went up and got on a wolf collaring project, and we trapped wolves up in Alaska. And it was quite an experience just to hold live wolves in your arms. They were sedated, some of them, but
sure.
And then I was just amazed on how non-aggressive some of them were. You'd walk up to them, and you can pet them in a trap. They just lay down. It's just a lot of misconceptions out there about things.
So, and just experience of life.
Yeah, experiences in life. And the pack trip was one of them. And it desensitized you to a point where I still remember being on that pack trip and coming out of hunting camp, and no phones, no nothing. I never saw people other than our hunters. Where we went, we didn't have back in the 70s, we didn't have the backcountry resonant pressure back then. We never hardly ever saw anybody when we were in hunting camp. Our camp sat about 12 miles up Wiggins, and I think Jimmy Owens has it now. I think it just changed hands, but it's quite a place. And we'd see our hunters, and I didn't like to guide that much. I liked the horse wrangling part. I always loved horses, and I prefer just to ride up and down the trail and pack feed. We had to pack our feed in, and guiding never did turn me on that much. I take an elk hunter out. I hate sheep hunting. Rowdy will attest to that, but the sheep hunting, the guys were always so serious and everything, and I just enjoyed wrangling and doing the horses and that sort of thing. But Bod'd make me guide every once in a while, and it was okay.
What about Wolverines? Recently in November, they were listed.
Yes.
Your experience?
I've never, the only experience I've had with a Wolverine is I found some tracks up on Spread Creek. I was trapping pine marten up there one time, and I saw some tracks one time, and I called Justin Clapp, who was the large carnivore guy, and he sent me off to somebody in Jackson, and I called him, and Kyle Lash came up. I think it was Kyle, and they identified him. I'd seen him in Alaska, and I thought that's what they were. There was a little bit of snow on them, and I didn't know if I was looking at a cat track at first, and I figured it out. And I thought that was cool. Having the Wolverine, I think, will be cool. We have them. They found one up above Lander, and I know Art on the reservation, the tribal game warden, they put some trail cameras out and found them on the reservation, and I think it'll be an interesting thing. I think we'll have to maybe, I know some of my trapper people will probably hate me for this, but I think we're going to have to pay attention to some of our trapping regulations in some of that country, wolf trapping and stuff. We start catching Wolverines, it becomes a different story.
Yeah.
And but that's down the road, I think.
It's political real fast.
Yeah, it does. It does. I don't think Wolverines are eating small children at bus stops yet or anything like that. I always use that line, but yeah, I think it's cool that we have them, and we're starting to see. They've seen them in Yellowstone Park a few times now, and I just can't wait till the day I see a track again.
Right. Yeah, in the years of you living in central Wyoming, born and raised in this area, the amount of time you've spent in the country, specific to mule deer, what are your thoughts on what you've seen in those changes? I was born in 1958. I started hunting with my dad when I was probably, 10 years old. And my dad was your typical weekend hunter, like we did back in the 60s and 70s. That's another thing I've noticed about hunting is, and a lot of it pertains to mule deer hunting and elk hunting. Back when we were a kid, you worked 5 days a week and you had your weekends off to go elk or deer hunting or something like that. And now we have a different worker and it's good or bad. When I worked in the oil field, I'd love to have this schedule where you work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And these guys have a lot more time to hunt. And I think that's changed our hunting that way. But when I was a kid, we used to go out here to the area 90, and it's not if you wanted a deer, it's
you're going to get one if you just want to shoot a deer. And I have seen the mule deer population collapse like it has. And I don't know where the hole is. I know we have this thing about predators. There's a hole somewhere. And I don't know if we need to look at the long-term grazing that we've done for the last 120 years, the mineral, which I'm old oil filled from way back. Like I said, my dad was. I don't know if that's it. When you see mule deer laying next to drilling rigs in the shade, but now we have migration corridors. We have encroachment from housing. We have a different hunter. We got master blaster scopes on guns that you can shoot deer at 1,000 yards. And I still shoot with my 1952 Model 70 with a Lyman 3-power Alaskan scope on it. I shoot something over 200 yards. I've done pretty good. And everybody has their own thing about that. And Bill Phelps is a gentleman from Jackson I met a long time ago. And I can just remember he sold that King's wool clothing. He was a salesman for him. Shows you how long ago that was. I don't even know if they're still in business. But like he just said, when we were standing there at one of the, I think it was the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation National Convention when it was huge back then, before we had internet and all that. And he said, how are the animals going to survive with all the gear and the scopes and the binoculars and the GPSs? And I think that's one thing about trapping and my pack trip and being what I do. You still have to hunt, and I think we've lost that. We got guys that I always say the four-wheeler was the best thing for the horses, because you don't see the old days. You see the horse trailers lined up in DuBois by the miles, and now you see ATVs, which I own one too, and I have horses. But that has all changed. I think we've lost that primal thing that we used to do, the hunting and the sensory thing that we do. And I know I got off a little bit from the mule deer thing, but I think there's a hole somewhere out there on this mule deer thing, and I don't know what it is. I have my own personal things, and I don't want to get you in trouble on it.
No, you won't get me in trouble.
Okay,
No, that's the beauty of this.
We have predators, and not that I'm pro-predator. I've trapped enough of them. There were times when I'd catch 20 fox a day, and I don't feel bad about it, but I sometimes think that maybe we're overdoing the fear of the predator on this, that it all works. This whole balance thing works. And I don't know. I'm not a biologist, and that's why I say I wish I was more educated on it. Everybody has their opinion. We got predators, land. It's just like the spotted skunk used to be everywhere. Now we don't have spotted skunks, and that's the chemicals that we use on farm crops has just devastated spotted skunks. You don't see them out in the farmland anymore, and you see them up in the rocks, and that's been looked at. And maybe we're doing something. I don't know. And this whole chronic waste thing is a problem. And now I brought this up at a meeting. What are we going to do? It's a prion. It's in the ground. I take my horse and I'm riding in my pasture, and I have that on my horse's feet, and I go on a pack trip. I'm taking that prion to the mountains. Right. Same way with my four-wheeler. I irrigate off my four-wheeler. I throw it in the back of my pickup. I go out to Green Mountain, go look for foxes. Guess what? I'm taking that with me. If I'm raising hay, what happens if I trim that hay? Do I have it in my hayfield? And we're a mobile society. It's not a good thing or bad thing. It's just what we do. We have a lot of things. These poor mule deer, and I wonder what's going to happen.
The interesting thing I'd like to circle back to is the adjective you chose specific to mule deer. The word you used was collapse.
Collapse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that been the observation?
To me, it has. Just like we were talking about before we set the microphones up, I went down to the Indian National Finals, and 2 years ago I drove down. I was in Big Piney doing some photography work, and my wife and I left, and we hit down there through Kemmer, and I don't know what highway that is down through there.
189.
189.
Yeah.
And we had to drive 40 miles an hour because the mule deer were crossing the road every 50 yards. And it was unbelievable what I saw, the big bucks and everything, because it was in late October, early November, just around the rut. It was the perfect time to see all them deer right in the evening. And of course, we had last winter, and it was horrible. And then this year, we did the same thing. I was in Big Piney on the exact same day, as a matter of fact, and drove down. And I think I saw 3 deer the whole time I drove that deal.
Just absent.
And you live there, and they're just gone. Out there where Rowdy and I live on the farmland, there's no deer. I used to have to put the fence around my haystack, and I hope I have a deer now. I don't do that. I'm hoping a deer will come in, and we don't have any deer. They're gone. They're gone in this part of Wyoming. Now, you go to DuBois, you see a lot of them on the hayfields, and I don't know what the numbers are. I'll be interesting. I see the Game and Fish has allocated $200,000 towards predator control in some areas. It's a known fact that if you really hammer the coyotes, a lot of times you end up with more than what you started with. A lot of them move in, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. We've done some things like that before, and like you said, everything takes time. I know we're an instant gratification society, but it's going to take some time to figure out what we're doing wrong. We're doing something wrong.
Have you seen a change that you can note specifically to changing habitat with the amount of time in the landscape that you cover and play in outside? Has there been a change on the landscape level with vegetation?
I have noticed the vegetation. I've noticed the cheatgrass thing. I do notice that. But I understand the sage chickens like cheatgrass. And I do counts for the game and fish. I volunteer and our sage grouse numbers are up. But yeah, I've noticed that the winter range is beat pretty hard a lot of times. And I know I was just out at Cody Martin's ranch and I was just really, it was satisfying to see somebody who left a lot of feed. There's a lot of winter range out there and they can use it come back this spring if they need it for their cows. But there's some elk and some deer out there. And maybe we need to look at habitat. It's all back to habitat. Always is. Maybe, and I don't know I probably don't know what I'm talking about. For many years, we pushed the elk thing with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. They were the biggest show in town, and they're a good group. I'm not going to say, as a member, I was chapter chair for 20 years. It's just we pushed the elk thing for many years, and we overlooked the deer thing, and maybe we've displaced mule deer because of elk. I don't know. We have a lot of elk.
Certainly a conversation.
It's just like everybody said the wolves were going to decimate the elk herd, and we're giving more tags and dubois than we have in 40 years, and we have more elk in Wyoming than we ever have, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't know. I have my personal opinion on that, and I figure the wolf's an opportunity to hunt, an opportunity to trap, and I look at it that way.
Interesting when you reflect and look back on 6.5 decades of living.
That sounds like a long time. but it is, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Right? Yeah.
Sorry, but there's nothing
it's scientific. The more birthdays you have, the older you live.
Yeah,
that's real.
And you just see stuff, and that's why I say education is so much, and read. And fortunately, I don't have internet at my house. You know what I mean? I don't have it here in my shop here at my office. My secretary's got it. I don't listen to that stuff. I only believe. I love the story. Don't believe anything you hear, and only half of what that kind of a thing. And so
there's some wisdom there.
Yeah, and I don't believe a lot of this stuff. I just don't believe. They're just so overwhelming with the social media thing and what it's done, and I just don't do it. I don't personally. I don't either.
Yeah,
I don't got time. I always make people mad when they say, "Oh, you see this on Facebook?" I said, "Isn't that for 12-year-old little girls?" And then people look at me. There's Instagram. That might be for 14-year-olds. I don't know, but I don't do it. I don't do it.
You can either watch somebody else live life, or you can live your own.
Yeah, I think actually I didn't say that. I didn't come up with that. I think Bob Dylan actually said it. I think Facebook's for 12-year-old little girls. He doesn't do it either. So Bob Dylan ain't going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And I don't even know his songs. But yeah, reflecting on 60-some years, it's been good. And that's the nice thing about getting old. You can say stuff and not care what people say. Like I said, we were joking earlier. I said, I've worked hard to try to make people happy for 45 years in the photography business. And when I retire, I might just blow it all off and make people mad for a couple of years. You know what I mean? And we can start today, maybe. I don't know. But the only thing I can say is when you're young, go do some stuff. Go do it. Just, I see people, I want to go to Alaska. I did too, and I didn't go to Alaska till I was in my 40s. And I'm glad I waited till I was in my 40s because I don't want to go to Alaska anymore. I got to have a plane and a boat and a lot of money to live there. It's pretty wild up there. But but Wyoming is pretty cool. And what was really funny was when I talk about that pack trip and, what it did to me and how it made me think on the whole thing. It started getting me going when I was a kid. And then I said I was going to get my 2 Bibles out. And
you got a couple of books here. These are the go-to books?
These are my go-to books, or they're my writers. One is Ted Karasote. I don't know if you've read Bloodlines.
I haven't.
It's probably one of the best books ever written on the hunting and the whole why we do it thing. Blood Ties, not Bloodline. Blood Ties, I'm sorry. And he wrote that. But it was really funny after I did my pack trip, and I think I bought this book in the 90s. I don't even know what year this book came out. And I was going to look and see what year he might have wrote this thing. 2004. And I was reading it, and I can remember when I came out of my pack trip and out of my hunting camp, and I hadn't been around people, I hadn't been around electronics, I hadn't been around a TV, I hadn't had a Coca-Cola, you know what I mean? The whole thing for months. And I was reading through this thing, and I'm an emotional guy. I actually brought tears to my eyes when I read this thing. And here was a paragraph in this book, and it said, "For a moment, I lose all track of where I'm heading. I'm caught in a world of smell that elicits sights and which turn invoke sounds. I stick my tongue out and breathe in, tasting fish, deer, and sky." And I don't know, some people probably think that's mushy, but I think we've lost that as our hunters now. We have that electronic thing in our pocket that shows us our map, that kind of a thing. I didn't even have a map when I went. I just took off. Nobody knew where I was at. Nobody knew where I was at for 6 weeks. Kind of general area where I was at, but if I'd gotten bucked off horse and broke my leg or my back, I'd lay there and just nobody, they probably would have found me. me. After a while, we didn't have the helicopters back then that could get where they were. And it was just something to do, to go out there and do that and know that I guess you could look back, hey, I survived that. You know what I mean? And it's like me when I go out and I carry bear spray. I don't carry a gun. I ain't got time to do that. When I'm out photographing grizzly bears and stuff, and you come back at the end of the day and you might have got fairly close to one or stumbled on one. Yeah, I survived. Got my bear spray. Carried 2 cans actually. But the whole thing about doing that, getting out and not just go out. It's like these guys, they throw their side-by-sides in like we all do, and we go out hunting for a week. And I don't know about you, but when you get ready to go somewhere, you're all wound up trying to get everything taken care of before you leave and getting your stuff ready. If you're out there for about 6 or 7 days, the first couple days, you're just unwinding. You know what I mean? You're just trying to unwind.
Yeah, acclimate.
And then, and then you get to enjoy it for about 3 days. Then if you take the Sunday to Sunday off, about Thursday, you're starting to think about what's all went home when you get back. Yeah, it's just go out and take some time off and do it. And if you're a young person, do it.
Do it while you can.
Do it while you can, and while
before you have
the
a mortgage. And
yeah, there was a young man. I don't know. You can Google him. I met a young man that came through here, and I thought I covered country. His name is Jeremiah Karsten. He took off from Chickaloon, Alaska, and said he was going to ride from Alaska to the Mexican border. His mother thought that he would get a phone call. She'd get a phone call in a couple days, and it was a 2-year project, and he made it to the Mexican border, and I got to meet the gentleman, and it took him 2 years, and then when he got to the Mexican border, he turned around. But he said he got through New Mexico, and he thought, I probably better get back to the real world, and he went back. But I've never heard any more about him, but he came through Riverton, Wyoming, and I got to talk to him for a little while, and we talked a little bit about my trip, and I talked a lot about his trip, but go do something crazy like that. I'm reading about the gentleman from Casper that's doing the 7 peaks, and I'm like, God, if I had the money, and I don't like heights, but I mean, stand up in the back of a pickup. But the other Bible back to the pack trip and the horses. The other Bible I got is Mark Sprague. If you've ever read Where Rivers Change Directions, you got to read it too. And it's about a kid that grew up on the North Fork of Cody on the Cross Sabers Ranch, and he has it's one of the finest books wrote about Wyoming. But this is something about when you're up in the mountains, and I longed for the days of my 4-wheelers and 3-wheeler days and driving pickups and all of that kind of stuff. But when I was this is another one of them books that you come across, and it reminds you of things. And it says here, he's talking about horses, and he says they ripple their hides and sweep the air with their tails as though the flies are eating them. But there are no flies. I allow just a moment to stand and lose myself in the rhythms of this small bunch. And there's a peace to grazing horses. And I think the peace to grazing horses says it all right there. And that's what it was up there. It was a very peaceful time in my life. And I was dumb then. You don't know anything when you're a 19-year-old kid. But it set the thing for my life that I'm going to do a lot of things. I'm in an industry where I didn't get rich, but I made a comfortable living, and I knew I couldn't travel all the world. I did go to Zimbabwe and hunt one time, and I've been to Alaska, and I've been to Canada hunting and fishing, but we have it all right here. I don't think people understand what we have here with the public land, and I'm a big proponent of public land, and I see these politicians that want to take it away, and political parties that don't think that federal land should be there, it should be under the state, and I don't believe that at all, because how much state land have we lost in the last 10 or 15 years?
Since statehood, about 30%.
30% of it. Yeah. And I just can't believe that. I like federal land. I like other people.
It truly is a national treasure.
It is. And I like to go other places to federal land and enjoy their federal land and other states. And I think we need to watch that. So be careful that way too.
Yeah, when you really start to extrapolate the cost of being able to manage those lands.
Yes.
And you take a fire like the Mullen fire a few years ago.
Yeah.
The state don't have that.
We don't have that. We couldn't control that. And I'll get back on my political bandwagon. I love that when I drive up to Green Mountain, where I spend a lot of time, and the desert, and there's those state sections, and it says no camping, no forest fires. But I'm like, oh yeah, let's make this state land. Yeah. And as a trapper, I have to have permission from the leaseholder to trap on that land. I can go out there and call a coyote and be there and hunt, but I can't trap on state land, federal or public land that I partially own. I have to have permission, and I've never had any trouble with any of the leasers. They've all been really great to work with. They're like, a lot of them go, what? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you want to do what? We really? And I don't know. It was I'm sure it was a state land board that did that, and people are like, oh, a lot of land leases don't even know what happens. But just be careful what we do there. We need to be really careful. But
much like the foresight with our national park system, public land is, in my mind, it's our greatest national treasure. If you're an outdoorsman, public land is where it's at.
It is. And that's where I spend all my time. I did trap a lot of private land in my fox trapping on the farmlands, but my bobcat trapping and probably 99% of my wildlife photography is all on public land.
Alan, I've got to see your photography pieces up close and personal. You do a great job with that. You've honed that skill set. Where can other folks go to look at that?
Actually, I'm just about ready to launch a new website, and I'll be putting one out. My Arapaho name is Walk, which is bear, and it was given to me by Wayne Seahair. It's actually a lot longer, but I make it Walk, and it's going to be Walk Nature, and it'll be out. It's going to be out this spring. I didn't realize putting together a website is so complicated and doing how I want to do it.
Right.
So,
if that's not your background.
It's not.
Mine either.
Thank God I have Dawn. Yeah, it's sometimes I call her up. My computer isn't working. I can't do anything on it. She says, turn it on. You know what I mean? Push this button and the little red light will come on. Oh, okay. Not how computer literate I am. So that's what we do. But there we go.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, for taking the time.
It's
when you meet someone who has a great experience, has great appreciation, it's just something that's contagious. It becomes something that you gravitate towards because you share a common value or a common bond that just appreciates our wild things and wild places, essentially. And I know that has defined you as a being and your existence, just your love of the outdoors, the time you've spent outdoors. And I
think that I saw it one time, and I can't remember what it exactly said, but it was a poster, and it said, Wyoming, keep it, and it was done like in the early 1800s, early 1900s by a little girl. And even back then, she was worried about it. And I remember there was a photograph, and it said, Wyoming, keep it wild, or something. And I don't remember what the little girl's name. I remember seeing that, and I didn't think nothing of it. And then I looked closer at the poster, and it was like early 1900s. A little 12-year-old girl made the statement that she was seeing a change in the early 1900s in Wyoming.
Crazy, huh?
I always say this about people and what my grandfather saw when the horse and buggy thing, and then the cars, and then he saw the man land on the moon, and what they see, and what are we going to see, and those kind of things. But I did the pack trip. I wrangled dudes. I guided. I trapped. I traveled all over. I've done things. Met a lot of wonderful people. Made a lot of friends in my photography business. A lot of long-term customers that have become more like family to me. I've had a great life. Don't have too many regrets. I haven't talked much about my wife. She put up with a lot of things. She put up with me getting sprayed by skunks in my trapping days and taken off by myself hunting. I still hunt a lot by myself. Even after the pack trip, I never could find people to hunt the way I wanted to hunt, I guess. Maybe I was grouchy to get along with, but I hunted by myself for a lot of years, and I enjoyed that. And I like to hunt with people too now, too. It's just a little bit of everything. So
just part of evolving.
Just part of it. Just part of it. Yeah.
Alan Center, thanks for taking the time. Look forward. Once your website's produced, I'm looking forward to sharing
I'll link you to it. We'll get going with it.
Yeah, good stuff. That's part of Wild Things and Wild Places. Again, joining me today, Alan Center. If you're ever in central Wyoming in the Riverton area, look Alan up. You'll be better for it. Just have a cup of coffee with Alan and just shoot the breeze.
And you can pet the cat.
And you can pet the cat. All right, that's Wild Things and Wild Places.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a muley fanatic.